Your mind was not meant to be this loud. It was not designed to replay conversations from 5 years ago. It was not designed to simulate every possible future that may never happen. It was not designed to analyze one decision from 10 angles until the decision expires on its own. And yet, here you are, lying awake at night, replaying, second-guessing, thinking in circles while life keeps moving forward without you. Overthinking doesn't feel dangerous at first. It feels responsible. It feels intelligent. It feels like you're being careful. But over time, it becomes a cage, because overthinking doesn't protect you from mistakes. It protects you from action. And action is where clarity lives. Welcome to How to Think Clearly. This audiobook is not about becoming emotionless. It's not about shutting down your thoughts. And it's not about pretending uncertainty doesn't exist. This is about learning how to see clearly when your mind is noisy, how to decide without spiraling, how to trust yourself again. In this audiobook, you will learn how to slow the mental noise, cut through confusion, and make decisions that move your life forward instead of trapping you in hesitation. Because here's the truth most people never hear. The quality of your life is shaped by the quality of your thinking, not the quantity of your thoughts. Most people don't lack intelligence, they lack clarity. Their mind is overcrowded. Their attention is fragmented. Their thoughts are reactive instead of intentional. They think more, but see less. And that's why they feel stuck. Overthinking turns small decisions into emotional weight. It turns uncertainty into fear. It turns options into pressure. It drains energy without producing movement. And slowly, confidence erodes. Because confidence doesn't come from certainty. It comes from deciding and learning you can handle the outcome. Clear thinkers understand this. They don't wait for perfect information. They don't wait until doubt disappears. They don't wait until fear is gone. They move with clarity, even when things are unclear. And that is a skill, a learnable skill. In this audiobook, we'll walk through the architecture of clear thinking. You'll learn why overthinking feels productive but isn't, how to separate signal from noise, how to make decisions without emotional overload, how to quiet the inner critic without silencing your intuition, how to think cleanly under pressure, how to build a mind that works with you, not against you. This is not theory. This is mental training. Because clarity is not a personality trait. It's a system. And systems can be built. Right now, your mind may feel like a crowded room where everyone is talking at once. Opinions, fears, past mistakes, future scenarios, no order, no hierarchy, no silence. Clear thinking begins the moment you stop trying to answer every thought and start choosing which ones deserve your attention. That choice alone changes everything. Now pause for a moment. Notice your breathing. Notice the fact that you're listening. Notice that nothing needs to be solved right now. That stillness you feel, even briefly, is clarity. It's not something you invent. It's something you return to. In the next chapter, we're going to begin with the foundation. Why your mind feels noisy in the first place, and why mental clutter is the real enemy. Not lack of intelligence. Once you understand that, you'll stop blaming yourself for overthinking and start dismantling it. Chapter 2. Why your mind is so loud. Your mind isn't broken. It's overloaded. That distinction matters. Because when you think something is broken, you try to fix it aggressively. When you realize something is overloaded, you learn how to clear space. Most people believe overthinking means they're thinking too much. That's not true. They're thinking without structure. They're reacting instead of directing, absorbing instead of filtering, consuming instead of choosing. Your mind today is exposed to more information in a single morning than previous generations processed in weeks. Notifications, opinions, news, messages, comparisons, urgency disguised as importance. And your brain, which evolved to solve immediate problems, is now expected to manage infinite input. So it does what it can. It keeps everything open, every possibility, every fear. Every unfinished thought. Because unfinished thoughts feel dangerous to the brain. They signal uncertainty, and the brain hates uncertainty. So it loops, replays, simulates, overanalyzes, not to torture you, but to protect you. Here's the paradox. The same mechanism meant to keep you safe is the one keeping you stuck. Overthinking is not intelligence gone wrong. It's protection without direction. The mind is scanning for threats, mistakes, and future pain, without a system to decide what actually matters. So, everything feels important. Every decision feels heavy. Every option feels risky. Every silence feels suspicious. Clear thinkers don't have quieter minds by accident. They have filters. They decide what deserves attention and what does not. They understand something fundamental. Attention is a currency, and clarity depends on where you spend it. Let's talk about mental clutter. Mental clutter is not the presence of many thoughts. It's the presence of too many unprioritized thoughts. Your mind becomes loud when nothing has rank. Fear has the same volume as logic. Opinion has the same weight as evidence. Possibility has the same urgency as reality. So everything competes, and competition creates noise. Imagine a room where everyone speaks at the same volume, all at once. That's overthinking. Clear thinking is not silencing the room. It's appointing a moderator. Someone who decides, you can speak, you can wait, you are irrelevant. That moderator is you, when you learn how to step out of reaction and into awareness. Now here's something most people miss. Overthinking is often a sign of avoided decisions. Not because you're incapable, but because decisions carry responsibility. Once you decide, you must act. Once you act, you must accept outcomes. Once you accept outcomes, you can no longer pretend you didn't choose. So the mind delays. It keeps thinking because thinking feels safer than deciding. Thinking keeps options open. Deciding closes doors, and closing doors feels like loss. But here's the truth. Every door you refuse to close becomes a hallway you live in. And hallways are uncomfortable places to stay. No direction, no rest, no progress. Clear thinkers understand that clarity does not come before decisions, it comes after them. You decide, then clarity organizes itself around that decision. Now let's address another source of mental noise: emotional contamination. Many people believe they're thinking logically, when they're actually thinking emotionally and calling it logic. Fear wears logic as a costume. Anxiety pretends to be planning. Insecurity disguises itself as analysis. Clear thinking requires separating emotion from evaluation, not ignoring emotion, but not letting it run the meeting. Emotion provides information. It does not provide conclusions. When fear speaks, clear thinkers listen, then verify. They ask, what is actually happening? What evidence do I have? What is speculation? That separation reduces noise instantly. Now let's talk about the role of environment. Your mind reflects what it consumes. Constant scrolling trains fragmented thinking. Endless comparison trains doubt. Urgent content trains urgency, not importance. Clear thinkers are ruthless with input. They know you cannot think clearly in a noisy environment, internal or external. They design their inputs to support clarity. Less news, less outrage, less low-level stimulation, more silence, more depth, more deliberate focus. This is not avoidance, it's hygiene. Mental hygiene is as real as physical hygiene, and without it, clarity becomes impossible. If this chapter is resonating, pause for a moment. Notice how much noise you've normalized, how many thoughts you respond to automatically, how rarely you ask whether a thought deserves engagement at all. That awareness is the beginning of clear thinking. In the next chapter, we'll move from diagnosis to practice. You'll learn the first concrete tool that clear thinkers use to stop spirals instantly, not by fighting thoughts, but by changing how they relate to them. And once you learn that, overthinking loses its grip. Chapter 3. Step out of the spiral. Overthinking doesn't begin as chaos. It begins as a single thought you take too seriously. One question: One doubt. One what if. And then something subtle happens. You lean in. You don't notice the moment you cross the line. But once you do, the spiral has started. You're no longer thinking. You're being pulled. Pulled into scenarios that haven't happened. Pulled into judgments that aren't proven. Pulled into futures you can't control. The spiral doesn't feel aggressive. It feels compelling, and that's why it's dangerous. Clear thinkers don't try to stop spirals with force. They interrupt them with positioning. They change where they stand in relation to their thoughts. Here is the first core principle of clear thinking. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness of your thoughts. That sentence sounds simple, but living it changes everything. Most people live inside their thoughts. They argue with them. They chase them. They obey them. Clear thinkers step back. They observe. Observation creates distance. Distance creates choice. Choice creates clarity. Now let's make this practical. The moment you notice overthinking starting, do not ask, "How do I solve this?" That question feeds the spiral. Instead, ask, "What kind of thought is this? Is it a prediction, a memory, a fear, an assumption?" Labeling changes your relationship to the thought. You're no longer inside it. You're looking at it. That single shift lowers emotional intensity immediately, because the brain calms when it feels orientation. Overthinking thrives on confusion. Clarity begins with categorization. Now here's the second principle. Thoughts are events, not commands. Just because a thought appears does not mean it deserves obedience. Your mind produces thousands of thoughts per day. Most of them are recycled. Most of them are irrelevant. Some of them are simply noise. Clear thinkers do not try to stop thoughts from appearing. They decide which thoughts earn response. Silence is not suppression. Silence is non-engagement. You don't argue with background noise. You let it pass. Now let's talk about urgency, one of the most powerful fuels of overthinking. The mind creates urgency to force resolution. This needs to be figured out now. If I don't decide immediately, something bad will happen. But urgency is often artificial, manufactured by anxiety, not reality. Clear thinkers ask a grounding question. Is this actually urgent? Or does it just feel uncomfortable? Discomfort wants immediate relief. Urgency requires immediate action. They are not the same. Many decisions feel urgent because they activate fear, not because they require speed. Clarity returns when you slow the timeline. Overthinking accelerates time in your mind. Clear thinking expands it. Now here's a tool that stops spirals fast. It's called externalization. Overthinking happens internally, where thoughts echo and amplify. Clear thinkers move thoughts out of the mind. They write them down. They speak them out loud. They put structure around them. Once thoughts are external, they lose emotional charge. They become objects instead of forces. Try this. Write the thought that's looping. Then write, what do I actually know? What am I assuming? What can I control? What can wait? This turns noise into signal. Clarity loves structure. Now let's address something important. Overthinking often disguises itself as responsibility. I just want to make the right choice. I don't want to mess this up. But underneath that is usually fear of self-trust. Fear that if you choose wrong, you won't be able to handle it. Clear thinkers trust something deeper than outcomes. They trust their ability to adapt. They know that no decision guarantees comfort, but most decisions are survivable, and adaptability beats perfection every time. Here's the truth. You don't need perfect decisions. You need recoverable ones. That mindset alone reduces pressure. When pressure drops, clarity rises. Now pause for a moment. Notice where you usually spiral. Relationships, career, self-image, the future. You don't need to fix it right now. Just notice. Awareness weakens patterns. In the next chapter, we'll move into decision-making itself. You'll learn how clear thinkers make decisions without waiting for certainty, and why certainty is not the goal. Because once you stop demanding certainty, decisions become lighter, and life starts moving again. Chapter 4. Decision without certainty. Most people believe good decisions come from certainty. They think clarity means knowing exactly what will happen next. They think confidence means eliminating doubt. They think clear thinkers are people who somehow see the future. They're wrong. Clear thinkers are not certain. They are decisive. And there is a difference. Certainty is passive. Decisiveness is active. Certainty waits. Decisiveness moves. Overthinkers wait for certainty and stay stuck. Clear thinkers act with incomplete information and learn their way forward. Here's the truth that unlocks better decisions. You will never feel fully ready before important decisions. Readiness is created by action, not thought. If you wait until fear disappears, you will wait forever. Fear doesn't disappear before decisions. It quiets after commitment. Clear thinkers know this. They don't ask, "Am I 100% sure?" They ask, "Is this direction reasonable and reversible?" That question changes everything. Now let's talk about the myth of the perfect decision. Perfection is a fantasy created by the mind to avoid responsibility. Because if there were a perfect choice, failure would be impossible. But life doesn't work that way. Most decisions are not right or wrong. They are trade-offs. Choosing one thing means not choosing another. Every yes carries a no. Overthinking happens when you try to avoid the pain of trade-offs. Clear thinking accepts them. Clear thinkers understand something deeply. Indecision is also a decision, and it has consequences. Staying still is not neutral. Waiting costs time, energy, and opportunity. And often, the cost of waiting is higher than the cost of choosing imperfectly. Now let's introduce a simple framework that clear thinkers use. It's called the 70% rule. When you have about 70% of the information you want, you decide. Why? Because waiting for 100% clarity usually means waiting too long. The remaining 30% often arrives only after action, through feedback, through experience, through correction. Clear thinkers move when the signal is strong enough, not perfect. Now let's talk about emotional contamination again. When you're anxious, every option looks dangerous. When you're tired, every decision feels heavy. When you're insecure, every choice feels like a test of worth. Clear thinkers don't ask themselves how they feel about a decision. They ask how they will feel after acting on it consistently. They project forward beyond emotion. They ask, will this create clarity or prolong confusion? Will this move me closer to alignment or keep me in limbo? Decisions that end limbo often bring relief, even if they bring challenge. Now here's another principle. You cannot think your way into confidence. You act your way into it. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It's a byproduct of it. Every decision you make and survive strengthens self-trust. Every decision you avoid weakens it. Over time, this compounds. Clear thinkers trust themselves because they have evidence. They've decided before. They've handled outcomes before. They've adapted before. Overthinkers lack confidence not because they're incapable, but because they haven't practiced deciding. Decision-making is a muscle. It strengthens with use. Now let's talk about regret. Most people overthink because they fear regret. But here's the truth. Most regret does not come from wrong decisions. It comes from unmade ones, from chances never taken, from words never said, from lives never lived fully because thinking replaced doing. Clear thinkers make peace with the possibility of regret. They understand that discomfort is chapter of living honestly, and they choose growth over safety. Now pause for a moment. Think about a decision you've been circling, one that keeps returning, one that drains mental energy. Ask yourself, is waiting giving me clarity or keeping me stuck? That answer is information. In the next chapter, we'll talk about something even deeper. Why mental clarity depends on emotional regulation, and why you cannot think clearly when your nervous system is overloaded. Because before the mind can choose well, the body must feel safe enough to allow clarity. Chapter 5. Calm the body, clear the mind. You cannot think clearly in a body that feels unsafe. That sentence explains more confusion, bad decisions, and mental spirals than most people realize. Overthinking is not just a thinking problem, it's a nervous system problem. When your body is tense, your mind scans for threats. When your breathing is shallow, your thoughts become urgent. When your nervous system is overloaded, clarity disappears. Clear thinking is not achieved by arguing with thoughts. It's achieved by regulating the state that produces them. This is why some days your thinking feels sharp and calm, and other days it feels chaotic and heavy. Same intelligence, same life, different nervous system state. Clear thinkers understand this instinctively. They don't try to solve big problems when their system is dysregulated. They calm first, then they think, because a calm body creates a cooperative mind. Now let's talk about the illusion of mental control. Many people believe they can think their way out of anxiety. They try to reason with fear. They analyze stress. They debate worry. And it only makes things worse. Because when the body feels threatened, logic becomes secondary. The brain shifts into survival mode. And survival mode is not designed for clarity. It's designed for speed. That's why overthinking feels frantic. Your mind is trying to protect you, without realizing it's exhausting you. Clear thinkers flip the order. They regulate first. Now here's the most important thing to understand. Clarity is a physiological state before it is a cognitive skill. So let's build the foundation. The simplest and most powerful regulator of mental clarity is breathing. Not deep breathing, not dramatic breathing, slow breathing, longer exhales than inhales. This signals safety to the nervous system. And when the body feels safe, the mind stops shouting. Try this now. Inhale slowly through your nose for 4 seconds. Exhale gently for 6. Do it again. Notice the shift. That small change lowers internal noise immediately. Clear thinkers use this instinctively. Before difficult conversations, before decisions, before responding emotionally, they regulate first. Now let's talk about another overlooked factor. Physical tension. Unreleased tension lives in the jaw, shoulders, neck, and chest. That tension feeds mental rigidity. A rigid body creates rigid thinking. Clear thinkers regularly release tension, stretching, walking, movement, not to be fit, but to be clear. Movement resets the nervous system. That's why solutions appear during walks, why clarity shows up in the shower, why fresh air calms the mind. Thinking improves when the body moves. Now let's talk about mental noise caused by overstimulation. Constant input keeps the nervous system alert. Notifications, messages, content. Your brain never gets the signal that it's allowed to rest. Clear thinkers create intentional silence. They don't fear it. They schedule it. Silence is where thoughts organize themselves. Noise scatters them. Now here's a critical shift. You don't need to solve everything immediately. You need to create the conditions where solutions can appear. Those conditions are calm, space, and time. Overthinking tries to force clarity. Clear thinking allows it. Now let's address emotional suppression. Some people think clarity means ignoring feelings. It doesn't. Unfelt emotion becomes mental noise. Anxiety that isn't acknowledged turns into rumination. Sadness that isn't felt turns into overanalysis. Anger that isn't expressed turns into harsh inner dialogue. Clear thinkers allow emotion without letting it steer decisions. They feel, then decide, not the other way around. Now pause. Ask yourself, when I'm overthinking, is my body tense? Is my breath shallow? Is my environment noisy? Those answers tell you where clarity broke down. Fix the state, and the thinking follows. In the next chapter, we'll sharpen clarity even further. You'll learn how to separate signal from noise, how to identify what actually matters and ignore the rest. Because clear thinkers don't think about more things, they think about fewer things, more deeply, and that changes every decision they make. Chapter 6. Signal versus noise. Clear thinking is not about thinking harder. It's about knowing what deserves thought at all. Most mental exhaustion doesn't come from complexity. It comes from giving equal attention to things that are not equal in importance. Trivial thoughts get premium attention. Unimportant details get emotional energy. Imaginary problems get the same weight as real ones, and the mind collapses under the load. Clear thinkers do something radically different. They filter ruthlessly. They understand this. If everything matters, nothing does. So this chapter is about building the internal filter that separates signal from noise. Because once you master this, overthinking loses its fuel. Let's define the two. Noise is anything that creates mental activity without forward movement. Replaying conversations that already happened. Imagining reactions that may never occur. Worrying about outcomes outside your control. Thinking about how you're being perceived instead of what you're doing. Noise feels busy. Signal feels useful. Signal is information that directly affects your next action. What matters now? What can be influenced? What changes your direction? Clear thinkers ask one decisive question repeatedly. Does this thought help me act wisely, or just feel busy? That question alone collapses mental clutter. Now let's talk about the biggest source of noise. Social comparison. Comparison floods the mind with irrelevant data. Other people's timelines, other people's opinions, other people's definitions of success, none of which actually tell you what your next step should be. Clear thinkers are informed, not distracted. They learn selectively. They observe without absorbing. They compare only against their own values. Because clarity collapses the moment you outsource direction. Now here's a critical insight. Overthinking often hides a lack of priorities. When nothing is clearly important, everything becomes mentally urgent. Clear thinkers decide their priorities before the day begins. Not reactively, not emotionally, deliberately. They know what matters, so everything else has less power. This is why clarity improves dramatically when you write down one thing that matters today, one thing that does not deserve attention, one decision you are not revisiting. These decisions pre-filter your thinking. Now let's talk about mental reopening. One of the most destructive habits is reopening closed decisions. You decide, then you doubt, then you rethink, then you reopen. This trains your mind to distrust resolution. Clear thinkers do not endlessly reevaluate settled matters. They ask, has new information appeared? If not, the decision stays closed. This preserves mental energy. Revisiting decisions without new data is not wisdom. It's anxiety disguised as analysis. Now let's talk about complexity addiction. Some people overthink because complexity makes them feel intelligent. Simple answers feel suspicious. Direct action feels risky. But clarity often looks boring, obvious, unimpressive. Clear thinkers respect simplicity. They know complexity is not depth. Depth is understanding what actually matters. Now here's a powerful practice. At the end of the day, ask yourself, what did I think about today that didn't deserve that much attention? Not to judge, to recalibrate. Your mind learns through reflection, and reflection sharpens filters. Now pause. Notice how many thoughts you've been entertaining that never required action. That realization alone reduces noise. In the next chapter, we'll talk about clear thinking under pressure. When emotions are high, when stakes feel real, when time feels short. Because clarity is easy when things are calm. The real skill is staying clear when they're not. And once you master that, your decisions stop being reactive and start being deliberate. Chapter 7. Thinking clearly under pressure. Pressure is where overthinking feels unavoidable. Deadlines, confrontations, high-stakes decisions, moments where consequences feel heavy. This is where most people lose clarity, not because they lack intelligence, but because pressure compresses perspective. Under pressure, the mind narrows. It focuses on threat instead of truth. It rushes instead of reasons. It reacts instead of chooses. Clear thinkers are not immune to pressure. They are trained for it. They understand something critical. Pressure does not destroy clarity. Panic does. And panic is optional. Now let's talk about what pressure actually is. Pressure is the nervous system interpreting importance as danger. The body tightens, breathing shortens, attention narrows. This is useful in physical emergencies. It is disastrous for decision-making. Clear thinkers interrupt this loop immediately. They do not rush into thought. They stabilize first. Here's the first rule of clarity under pressure. Slow down the body before speeding up the mind. That means pause before responding. Breathe before deciding. Create seconds of space before action. Seconds matter. One slow breath can prevent one bad decision. Now let's talk about time distortion. Under pressure, everything feels urgent. The mind screams, "Decide now." Clear thinkers challenge urgency. They ask, what happens if I wait 10 minutes? What happens if I wait 1 hour? What happens if I sleep on this? Often, the answer is nothing catastrophic. Urgency shrinks when questioned. Now let's talk about emotional hijacking. Strong emotions want immediate expression. Anger wants release. Fear wants escape. Anxiety wants reassurance. Clear thinkers do not make decisions while emotionally hijacked. They name the emotion. I am angry. I am anxious. I am afraid. Naming creates separation. Separation creates control. Emotion can be felt without being obeyed. Now let's talk about clarity frameworks under pressure. Clear thinkers simplify questions. Instead of asking 10 things, they ask 1. What is the next right move? Not the perfect move, not the final solution, the next right move. Clarity lives in sequence, not certainty. One good step beats a frozen perfect plan. Now let's talk about regret prevention. Under pressure, people often choose relief over alignment. They say yes to end tension. They avoid truth to avoid discomfort. They choose comfort to escape pressure. Clear thinkers ask a powerful question. Will future me respect this decision? That question cuts through emotional fog. It shifts perspective forward. It brings values into the room. And values anchor clarity when emotions shake it. Now pause. Think about a recent moment where pressure rushed your thinking. Notice where you reacted instead of chose. No judgment, just awareness. Awareness is training. In the next chapter, we'll talk about trusting your judgment again. How to rebuild confidence in your decisions after years of overthinking. Because clarity is not just about quieting the mind. It's about believing you can handle what comes next. And once that belief returns, overthinking loses its power. Chapter 8. Rebuilding trust in your own mind. Overthinking does not come from caring too much. It comes from trusting yourself too little. Most people who overthink were once decisive. Something happened. A mistake, a failure, a judgment from someone they respected, an outcome they didn't expect. And slowly, without realizing it, they stopped trusting their inner compass. They started outsourcing decisions. They started second-guessing instincts. They started needing reassurance before moving. Overthinking became a defense. If I think enough, I won't be wrong again. But that belief is false. Clear thinkers understand something deeper. Trust is not restored by thinking more. It is restored by surviving your decisions. You don't rebuild trust by waiting until you're sure. You rebuild it by deciding and handling the result. Now let's talk about self-trust honestly. Self-trust does not mean believing you'll always choose perfectly. It means believing you can adapt, recover, and learn. Clear thinkers trust their resilience, not their prediction accuracy. That distinction removes pressure. Now let's address the inner critic. The inner critic pretends to be protective. It says, don't rush. Be careful. Think this through again. But listen closely. That voice often shows up after decisions are made. It reopens settled ground. It questions progress. It erodes confidence quietly. Clear thinkers treat the inner critic differently. They do not argue with it. They thank it, and then ignore it. Thank you for trying to protect me. I've already decided. That boundary is powerful. Now let's talk about intuition, because it's misunderstood. Intuition is not magic. It's pattern recognition based on experience. The problem is that overthinking drowns it out. When the mind is loud, intuition whispers. Clear thinkers create silence so intuition can be heard. They don't obey intuition blindly. They check it against values and evidence, but they don't dismiss it either. They respect it. Now here's a critical practice. Start making small, low-risk decisions quickly. What to eat, what to wear, when to leave, what to work on next. Stop optimizing minor choices. Save thinking for what matters. This trains decisiveness without danger. Confidence grows through repetition. Now let's talk about post-decision behavior. Most people sabotage self-trust after deciding. They replay, they doubt, they imagine alternatives. Clear thinkers don't do that. Once a decision is made, they shift focus to execution. They ask, how do I make this work? Not, was this right? That shift protects clarity. Now let's talk about mistakes. Clear thinkers do not romanticize mistakes. They extract lessons, then move on. They don't build identity around error. They don't shame themselves. They correct course. Mistakes are feedback, not verdicts. And feedback improves clarity. Now pause. Ask yourself, where did I stop trusting myself? What moment taught me to hesitate? You don't need to relive it. Just acknowledge it. Acknowledgement loosens its grip. In the next chapter, we'll bring everything together. How to live with a clear mind, not just in moments, but as a lifestyle. Because clear thinking is not a technique you use occasionally. It's a way you move through the world. And once it becomes your default, life gets lighter. Chapter 9. Clear thinking as a way of life. Clear thinking is not something you switch on when life becomes difficult. It's something you live inside, quietly, every day. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make you louder or more dominant. It makes you steadier. Most people think clarity is about having answers. It's not. It's about having orientation, knowing what matters, knowing what doesn't, knowing when to act, and when to let things pass. Clear thinkers don't feel the need to resolve everything immediately. They're comfortable with open loops because they trust themselves to return when the time is right. Now let's talk about the daily habits of clear thinkers. Not hacks, not tricks, patterns. First, they protect mornings. The mind is most impressionable at the start of the day. Clear thinkers don't begin with noise. They don't flood their awareness with other people's priorities before orienting themselves. They create a buffer. Silence, writing, movement, reflection, not productivity, orientation. Because whoever sets your mental tone in the morning often controls your thinking all day. Second, they reduce decision volume. Overthinking often comes from decision fatigue. Too many choices, too many micro decisions, too many open tabs, internally and externally. Clear thinkers simplify. They standardize routines, they limit options, they automate the unimportant. This preserves cognitive energy for what matters. Third, they think on paper. The mind is a terrible place to store complexity. It exaggerates, it distorts, it loops. Clear thinkers externalize. They write problems down. They outline decisions. They give thoughts boundaries. Once a thought has a container, it loses power. Clarity loves containers. Fourth, they practice selective ignorance. They do not consume everything. They do not follow every opinion. They do not engage every argument. They do not track every update. They ask, does this help me live better or just feel informed? And they choose accordingly. Now let's talk about emotional discipline. Clear thinking does not mean emotional suppression. It means emotional literacy. Clear thinkers feel emotions, but they don't let emotions blur reality. They allow sadness without making it a story. They allow fear without making it a prophecy. They allow anger without making it a command. They understand this deeply. Emotions are weather. Values are direction. You don't let the weather choose where you're going. You adjust how you travel. Now let's talk about conversations. Clear thinkers listen more than they speak, not because they're passive, but because listening clarifies context. They pause before responding. They ask clarifying questions. They don't rush to prove intelligence. They prioritize understanding over winning. This reduces conflict and mental residue. Mental residue is what drains you after conversations. Clear thinkers leave conversations clean. Now let's talk about solitude. Solitude is not loneliness, it's mental hygiene. Clear thinkers spend time alone deliberately, not to escape people, but to recalibrate perception. In solitude, you hear your own signal again, without interference, without noise, without comparison. That's why clarity returns there. Now pause. Notice how different this feels from fixing your mind. You're not fighting thoughts anymore. You're organizing your life so clarity becomes natural. That's the shift. Clear thinking is not force, it's design. In the final chapter, we'll close this audiobook properly, with integration, with a final reframe that ties everything together. Because stopping overthinking is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming present, decisive, and at peace with uncertainty. And once you understand that, you stop trying to control your mind and start leading it. Chapter 10. Think clearly, live better. This is where everything comes together. Not as a technique, not as a checklist, but as a way of being. Because clear thinking is not about eliminating uncertainty, it's about becoming comfortable inside it. Once you stop demanding perfect clarity, clarity appears. Once you stop trying to control every thought, your mind becomes cooperative again. This is the paradox of overthinking. The harder you try to think your way to peace, the further peace moves away. Clear thinkers don't chase mental silence. They create mental order, and order changes everything. Let's anchor the core truth of this entire audiobook. Your mind is not the enemy. It's an instrument, and like any instrument, it needs tuning, not punishment. Overthinking happened because you cared, because you wanted to do well, because you wanted to avoid pain, because you wanted to choose correctly. There is nothing wrong with that. What needed to change was the method, not the intention. And now you know the method. You know how to step out of spirals. You know how to separate signal from noise. You know how to calm the body before asking the mind to decide. You know how to act without certainty and trust yourself afterward. That knowledge is not fragile. It stays with you. Now let's talk about the real outcome of clear thinking. It's not that life becomes easier. It's that life becomes simpler. Fewer internal battles. Less mental friction. More forward movement. You stop living in your head and start living in reality again. Decisions don't feel like threats anymore. They feel like steps. Some forward, some sideways, some corrective, all survivable. That realization frees you, because when you trust your ability to handle outcomes, fear loses leverage. And when fear loses leverage, overthinking collapses. Now let's talk about what happens next. You will still think, you will still reflect, you will still analyze when it matters, but you won't live there anymore. Thinking becomes a tool, not a place you get stuck. Silence becomes familiar. Presence becomes accessible. Decisions become cleaner. You stop asking, "What if I'm wrong?" and start asking, "What's the next honest step?" That shift is everything. Now pause. Notice how different this feels from where you started. Less tension, more spaciousness, more trust. That's not motivation, that's clarity. If this audiobook resonated with you, anchor it. Hit like, not for the algorithm, but as a signal to yourself that you are done living inside mental noise. Leave a comment with the line that stayed with you, the one that cut through the fog. Subscribe, not to consume more, but to stay aligned with clarity over chaos. And if someone in your life is trapped in overthinking, stuck in hesitation, or quietly exhausted by their own mind, share this with them, not to fix them, but to remind them that clarity is a skill, and skills can be learned. I'll leave you with one final line. Let it sit, let it guide you. You don't need to think more to live better. You need to think clearly, and then act. Tell me what audiobook topic you want next, and whatever decision is waiting for you, make it calmly, make it deliberately. and trust yourself enough to move forward. One more chapter, next chapter. The still point. There is a place inside you where thinking ends,